Hi guys and welcome to this video. So today I decided to do some Europe streaks and this is for two reasons. First of all, as you can see on screen, our record has been beaten by Magyaron. Congrats on that, Magyaron. This was the longest standing record that I've ever had on this website, which was more than 6 months, I think. The video was published on the 1st of August, so I think it's a good time to reclaim this record. Second, I want you to know the thought process and the clues that I use to guess correctly on streaks. By the way, this was recorded with voiceover because it usually takes several attempts to get a good streak going, and it's quite hard to record with voice all the time. So, without further ado, let's start the streak. So, we started off in a village in the mountains. The architecture looked Central European, and I just looked around and eventually I saw a blue sign in German, and then I saw another one. So with the Gem4 coverage, this has to be in Austria. So I went somewhere in the mountains and it ended up being in the northern hills. Now for round two, we have a much drier landscape, and this no passing sign looked pretty Spanish, and we also had the thick red border, and here again. So it has to be Spain, and by how the landscape looked, it looked a bit Portuguese, so I went close to Portugal. And for round three, we can instantly see a hollow pole painted white at the bottom, and there's also a shape of Romania there, so this was pretty straightforward. And I looked a bit at the architecture and I thought that this was Transylvanian, and it ended up being close to Timisoara. And in this one, we can only see one clue, which is the language with the W and with what seems to be a Slavic variant. So the W in the Slavic variant is usually Poland. I looked and scanned for more clues, but I couldn't find anything, so I just went in the middle and ended up being in Opole. And for the last round of this game, we had a dirt road in a pretty bad condition, and we had the black car, which can only be seen in Russia and Spain, but this was evident not to be in Spain, and also there was Cyrillic there. And in Russia, I'm pretty bad, I don't know where to go, and this looked pretty generic. So I just went southeast of Moscow, and at the end it was I think it was in St. Petersburg, yeah, or close to St. Petersburg. So for round six, we had long dashes on the side of the road, which combined with the birch trees, the Nordic houses, and the hills in the distance reminded me of only Norway. And I zoomed on the valley to the east, which reminded me of the far eastern part of Norway, not far from the Swedish border, and that's where I went. Here we can see a white line in the middle and some white on black arrows that can only be seen in Italy, Greece, or Albania. And we had no antenna, which out of those can only be found in Italy. And at the end, I could make out those blue Italian road signs. And this one was a bit hard from the really start. There was no visible clues. The houses looked a bit Balkan. And we had this long antenna. But I was missing the large clue at the start. And then that was until I found those roofs that you can only find in Montenegro and Albania. And by how the roofs looked, which were very sharp, I went Montenegro because Albania has flatter roofs like those in Greece or Turkey. In this one we had what seemed to be an alpine ski resort. We had a single blue EU plate. We had alpine architecture. We had no low car, and I was pretty unsure for a long time here because there's many countries here that could be possible. And I was really unsure about Austria and France because they only seemed the only plausible ones here. But I finally decided to go Austria because we didn't have the blue on the right, which we often see in French plates. And for the end of this game we had a Gen 2 coverage with some blurred out house, and this red brick houses with tall brown roofs you often see in Belgium. And I could finally make out the red font on the plates that you also commonly see in this country, and it was indeed Belgium at the end. To start the new game we were in a residential area, and if you see those curvy sign holders you're definitely in Denmark. And the style of the windows also matched. I then tried to scan for a lot more clues but could not find any other sign of confirmation. I I confirmed that was the sign, and that was the only clue here. So I had to go what I did actually know, and it was at the end it was close to Copenhagen. And this over here looked like a generic Mediterranean style two-story house. And when I turned around, I saw a sign with carrer, which means street in Catalan. I looked for maybe some more specific clues to find the area where we were. I saw that we had the sea down southeast. I went for Catalonia at the end because the coast matched, but it was actually Mallorca, which also speaks Catalan. The 13th round offered a farm round through some fields in Gen 2 coverage. The landscape looked Western European, and we could see hedgerows, which are a feature of the UK, France, and to some extent Ireland. I then scanned for poles and houses, but I couldn't find anything helpful for a long time. I thought that house could be French because of that dark roof, but it wasn't clear because you can also see it in other countries. And this pole was characteristic of France and not of the other countries I've mentioned, so I had to go for it, and I went Western because of the landscape. And here you could see the W's I mentioned earlier as a feature of the Polish language. And there was also a green road sign which you can only see in Poland and Hungary, but Hungary does not have the red and yellow highway shields. And if you see this hollow pole that doesn't go to, with the holes that doesn't go to the top, and you are probably in Poland, though Hungary is still possible, and this time it was actually Warsaw. Here we have yellow plates with a blue border on the left that you often see in the Netherlands, and the red brick buildings were consistent with this country, and that blue street sign certainly looked Dutch, and there was a canal, so I went Amsterdam, but at the end it was Groningen. The fourth game started with a mountain path with no road markings, and to the east you can make out those thick white poles with a sharp top and a grey strip towards the top that you can only find in France. And on the other side, that over there to the left looked like a French D-road marker, and here I could make out some French language on the warning sign, and I ended up going close to Lyon because it was hilly and I got quite close. In this one we had winter coverage that is very common in Bulgaria and Hungary, although other countries like Czechia have it too. But if you see that stone on the side of the pole, it's either Slovakia or Hungary, and Slovakia doesn't have winter coverage. And also the low shrubs you see here are very common in Hungary, and I just plonked it because I didn't know where it was. This one was a divided highway, and if you see a divided highway with very thick strips in the middle of the road, Serbia becomes likely. Those borders at the back and also on this side can be seen in Slovenia, Montenegro or Serbia. And surprisingly, we did have an antenna on this round, which is not usually the case in Serbia, but you can see it in parts of Belgrade and on the main highway. And I also used my gut here to go with Serbia. Here we had a Nordic red wooden house, and there were also short strips on the side of the road as opposed to the longer Norwegian ones, so it had to be Sweden. And we also had this blue Swedish town sign, and those pines you usually see them in the center of Sweden, so that's where I went. And for round 20 we can see here yellow plates on the back but not on the front of cars, which only happens in the UK. We also see a top level domain and England mentioned. And those white signs with the black arrow are also British. And with the white houses I went northern, close to Leeds, but as you can now see, I was completely wrong this time. So this one was a rather simple round. We could see a generic Nordic board and a solid line on both sides of the road. We could also see many birches and it was relatively flat, so I ended up going for Finland. This is Norway. Here we didn't have the long side dashes we saw before, but we did have the yellow middle dashes that you could only see in Norway. There was also this yellow town side on a black background, which is also only in Norway, and this rhombus shaped sign with the road number below, which can also only be found in this country. I went central, but it turned out to be much more north than I thought. Here you could see the Swedish short dashes again and some Nordic architecture. But more importantly, the new feature here was this yellow sign with a red arrow outline that you can only see in Sweden. It's similar to the Norway one, but the colors are different. Round 24 was a much harder round than the previous three, and we could see some one-story houses with terracotta roofs with a painted bottom, which is a typical feature of southern Hungary, western Romania, and northern Serbia. And I didn't see it at the time, but there was a Dacia car, which is a Romanian brand, and there were some hollow poles there, so Serbia was excluded. I was trying to read the language there, but I couldn't infer anything meaningful. With those relatively dry hills, I decided to go Romania, and the water to the south, which was like a river or a lake. I thought we were on the Danube looking at Serbia, and I was actually correct in that. And to finish off this game, we had another Nordic round with birches, and this black direction sign is only found in Finland. And you can also just make out T, which means street in Finnish. And it turned out to be very close to that first Finland round. Now we had what seemed to be a Central European town. The language looked to be Romance, and in the street sign we could see Louis, which is a French and Romanian pronoun, but the architecture didn't look French at all. And the bottom of that pole was painted white, which can be seen in Romania. And I went western because the architecture was not too far off the other round, and it was just Transylvania. In this one I struggled a bit. This looked like a typical northwestern European residential area. I could visualize some red Belgian license plate font there, but I wasn't confident at all this time. And this was because that neat grass to the north reminded me a bit of Denmark, and the one-story house to the east also reminded me a bit of Denmark. And there was also not many, or not at all, brick buildings, red brick buildings that I already mentioned before. And although there were some gray ones to the north, so I spent quite a lot of time here thinking. I was looking all the time for the red brick buildings, but I couldn't find anything. There was also an evident lack of language here that could help me. I was trying out to read that language, but I couldn't, because this was like Gen 2 coverage, which is usually poor quality, so it's hard to read some things that are far away. I thought that could be a red brick building there, and I finally decided to go for Belgium because I believe the red license plates and the grey brick building to be stronger clues. And indeed it was Belgium, very close to the Dutch border. So the first thing you can see here is a Czech or Slovakian board, but this one was bright, which I have only seen in Czechia. There was SK written on the house, which threw me off for a moment, and the roofs there looked more Czech than Slovakian. And at the end, I could make out that white arrow on the blue sign that is only Czech and not Slovakian. In this round you can see some yellow stripes on the side of the road and some English language on the sign, and we are driving on the left side of the road. This house with that dark grey roof is more common in Ireland than in the UK, and also there's an American yellow sign on the left side of the road there, which is exclusively Irish. And in round 30 we had a dry, hairy Mediterranean climate. Those stone houses are common in Spain and very southern France, but that black and white arrow is exclusively Spanish, although Italy has some similar arrows but with less arrows. And at the end I could make out that yellow Spanish Garde reflector, which is only found in Spain. And I decided to go close to Valencia due to the abrupt dry hills, and it ended up being close to Benidorm. So here I thought that we are crossing a lake. We can see those solid lines at both sides of the road again, and those short dashes in the middle that we saw before in Finland. On the other side we could see what seemed to be a dam, and we saw that birch trees dominated the landscape, and it was exceptionally hilly for Finland, so I went quite north. Here we have a Spanish board and a thick red border on that give way sign, and on this octagonal stop sign is also Spanish, and that is Spanish language over there. And with those planted round trees that I remembered from playing a Spain round, they were close to Valladolid, and I was right with that. This time we had the board we saw before in Serbia, but also exists in Slovenia and Montenegro. We had no rifts in the sky, and what seemed to be no antenna either. The landscape seemed to be drier than in Slovenia, and those houses did not seem neat enough for that country. So I settled to go for Serbia. And with the dry hills I went southern, but it was actually close to Bosnia. So for the 34th round we had that sign for leaving a town, and that font that is distinctly Hungarian, and that Irish shield below it is also characteristic of this country. And on the other side there was also a red on black border that can be found in Hungary. Croatia and North Macedonia have a similar one, but the red is thinner, and it was quite hilly, so I tried to go northeast, and however it was on the opposite side of the country. Here we had an extremely flat field and a wide poor road that reminded me of Russia and Ukraine, as well as the arrow sign. But those thick square bollards and that long road sign with lines on the back of it is exclusively Ukrainian, and you could also make out the poplars in the distance, which are also more common in Ukraine. I hesitated a bit because there was no red car that you could see usually in Ukraine, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish both countries, but at the end I was correct. Here we had similar bollards to those in Montenegro, Serbia and Slovenia, but notice the dash is grey and there's a piece of metal on the top of the bollard, and these features are only found in Austria. So I went for somewhere high up in the mountains. And it resulted to be much more west. This looked pretty similar to be honest, but the road was of a much worse quality. There was like a typical South Balkan red guardrail to the south, and we also saw the aforementioned rift in the sky that can be found in Montenegro and Albania. But with the guardrail and the spruces, I decided to go for Montenegro, somewhere in the mountains, and it was closer to Albania than I thought. This looked a bit drier but not extremely different. We can see those rocky hills in the distance, and those rocks on the side of the road also indicated to be in the Western Balkans, and that short antenna is found only in Croatia. So after a bit of turning around to confirm it, I went towards the south of the country, and it was a bit more south. Now we moved on to a small town, and those small arrow signs with that font are common in small places of France. The language there also looked to be like the most French thing I've ever seen. And that neat hollow pole with the holes not reaching the other side is found in France and sometimes in Belgium. And those orange terracotta roofs are often found in the western part of the country, and that's where I went. And it was right. This looks to be like a typical Nordic round, especially with those red wooden houses again. And that blue bus stop sign to the southwest is also Finnish, and the lack of road markings is also more common here than in Sweden. I went south because there were more pines than birches, but it ended up being north. So this time we saw an extremely dry, almost steppe-like climate, and that back of the sign is similar to what we saw in the previous Ukrainian round. There was once again no car meta, but other factors like the planted trees along the road, the crossing sign not having a yellow border, and the bad quality of this road made me think of southern Ukraine rather than southern Russia. As it was hilly, I thought it to be close to Moldova, and I eventually found the road. Here we had another semi-urban round. I saw first of all Lithuanian Poles, and there was a sign there that literally said Lietuvos and had the outline of the country, so it was pretty easy to recognize this. In this round we saw an Italian no parking sign on the bin and also some Italian language. There were some blue Italian signs in the distance to the south, and the window shutters also matched Italy. And going by the architecture, I decided to go towards the north, but not extremely to the north, and I was kind of right. So this one was one of the easiest of the streak. I could see Icelandic yellow bollards, the characteristic lack of trees, and that's some volcanic soil to the north. There was also a white car with long antenna, which is always present in Iceland. For the 45th round, we saw a Slavic language which had many accents, which from my experience I found that was either Czech or Slovak. The borders matched and looked shiny again, making Czechia more likely. And that road number there had a thick white border which you can only see in Czechia and not Slovakia. And finally, I could picture that arrow at the top of that sign, which is found only in Czechia out of those two countries. And when it comes to landscape, those hills with fields looked more Czech too than Slovak. It was Czechia. In this round, you can see a typical Russian style one-story wooden house on the right and meters written in Cyrillic. And for those that know Cyrillic, that says Ulitsa, which is street in Russian. It is also Karl Marx Street, which is something you don't see anymore in Ukraine. And there we have the yellow border on crossing signs we didn't see in Ukraine before. And as always, I never know where in Russia we are, so don't ask me for that. Here we have winter coverage and short dashes in the middle of the road and a line of planted trees, which out of the most likely countries with winter coverage, it has to be Hungary. And as it was quite flat, I went towards the south and was 24 kilometers away. And here we can see a German house there, an awful gentle coverage, and that notice board is also typical for Germany. I ended up going with the rural area because that's where most of the coverage is. So in this round we can see an extremely small space in between dashes which can be found in France, in the UK, and sometimes Portugal. We have there a Peugeot, which is a French car. The architecture and the red window shutters are typical from France, and that white on blue arrow is seen in France and sometimes in the Catalonia region. And the road sign over here had a thick white border on the sides, which I found out many times in France. And I finally went southern because of the architecture. So this is for 50. You can see here a Danish border that has a red strip at the back and a yellow trapezium on the front and the white one at the back. There's also a yellow plate that can be occasionally seen in Denmark, especially in commercial vehicles. And here is curved sign holders and the white on red sign, direction sign that you can see in Denmark. So thank you all for watching the video. Subscribe, like, and check out my Twitch channel where I also do occasional Geoguessr streams. The link is in the description. And stay tuned for the second part of the video. Let's see if we can reclaim this record.